This podcast is brought to you by Kangaroo Fern Productions, Australia's independent podcast management. Book a call at www.kangaroofern.com/book now.
Tulungan ninyo na makilala ng community na disente tayo. Kaya ang mga estudyante namin sa Philippine language, pinupuri ng mga nasa McDonald. Sabi, are you the teacher in your language? Yes. Wow, your students, they are so wonderful, beautiful children. They are so good and polite. Really? Sabi ko. Oh, yeah, because we always teach them our culture. Nako, siningit ko na naman yung culture ko. Filipino culture, that's what we are. We are polite, we are respectful, we are loving people, and above all, spiritual loving people. We are faith. We have the faith. We are faithful to our religion, to our God.
That was Juliet Oy. She teaches the Filipino language to Filipinos in Australia. She emphasized to her students the importance of culture and learning one's native language, even if you live 1,000 miles away from your native land. She also translated the Australian national anthem to Tagalog. I'm Miko Santos, founder of Kangaroo Fern Media Lab and Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate, and creator of Pod Fiesta Community. This is Filipinotastic, a podcast show about Filipino diaspora and their stories that will inspire others to make an impact to our community. According to early childhood studies, many immigrants are gradually losing their native language as they get linguistically absorbed into English-speaking society. However, maintaining your original linguistic fluency is important for a variety of personal, social, intellectual, educational, and economic reasons. What happens if a child is born in a foreign country and never learned her native language?
Language brings so much connection to the Philippines. The language also, but when we speak, there is these feelings, this kind of a different level of understanding of our country. So what I have found with the languages, languages that includes a dialect as well of many other Filipinos, but the languages bring so much feelings and emotions and expressions, and not only that, I find that one person who has a second language, I find them that they're much more tolerant of other people as well, that they're able to understand and be patient about other culture as well. So language itself is one thing, but what comes out of it is what makes me feel like this is where it should be. This is where kids should be, learning the language, because these are the benefits that they will receive from it, not just from speaking to their grandparents or help someone to translate. So what I'm finding is I'm very very fortunate that I kept the language and I didn't lose it, because now I'm able to help my older Filipino communities when they need help and they need translating as they get older, as their hearing is not so good anymore. I feel like I'm there to help them. So that's the aspect of the language that I find that's very important.
That was Irene Evangelista, president of Filipino Ethnic School of South Australia. It is the only Filipino ethnic school left in the area and still standing strong amidst the pandemic.
Filipino Ethnic School was founded by Dr. Reynaldo Huanta back in 1987. He was very passionate about preserving the language and culture of the Filipinos. So fortunately, Filipino Ethnic School was already established by the time that I joined in. The one at Salisbury Primary School, where we hold our school, started in 1989. I would say that I'm the third person to have taken over this Filipino Ethnic School. So it was run by my predecessors who were very passionate about the Filipino culture. Well, first of all, the passion started only maybe when my daughter was born. She's now 17 years old. I moved here in Adelaide about 30 years ago, and not thinking much about the Filipino culture, adopting the new the Australian way, so to speak. And then one day I realized that, hang on a second, there is something that's missing here. I now have this little baby who is half Filipino. And suddenly I realized that I've got to do something about it. So that's the inception of my passion for preserving the Filipino culture and the language. And so that passion, the reason for that is I see so many over the last 30 years who were born here, and I understand my mom's language very well. I speak, I write, I translate. And it is so helpful, and the deep root that I have for our country, I realized that in the moment that my daughter was born, and I wanted to make sure that get passed on to her and to her children. Now she may not go back in there, she may not actually fully learn the language, but it will be in her heart forever. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to show other moms my age as well, those who have especially children who were born here, or maybe half Filipino, half Australian. Not even that. Some of my friends who have got children who were born here, they're from both Filipino parents. Some of them are forgetting the culture, the language, and I want to reinvigorate that. So I found Filipino Ethnic School through a friend by chance, and that's where it's all started. So here we are. We are the only Filipino Ethnic School here in South Australia that's left, and we're still going. So that's where it started, and that's where the passion started.
Language is rich in history and culture. Learning the native language entails studying the same history and culture as your parents, relatives, and even prior and following generation.
If you can't speak the language, I personally feel I have disconnected myself from the Philippines, from where I grew up, from where I was born. And I feel that to a degree, my personal feeling would be I have let my mom down because it is through her that I am who I am, because of the culture, because of the language, because she is a Filipino, because she had passed on our grandparents' traditions and ideals. And for me not to be able to speak, or for their future, children that won't be able to speak, I would find that disheartening. And many oftentimes I find that those who realize that they're not able to speak the language, that they have there's a little bit of regret over there. Why didn't I learn it? And oftentimes I have come across that as well. So yes, if we can't speak the language, not quite true Filipino. I feel that sounds probably very harsh, but as I have become older, hopefully wiser, I realize that language and culture, and that goes for anyone, it is in them. We have to preserve it, or otherwise we would lose it.
Around 400 languages has gone extinct in the last century alone, roughly one in every 3 months. And the most linguists believe that half of the world remaining 6,500 languages will be dead by the end of this century. Some even put that figure as high as 90%. What if the Filipino language will be one of them?
And based on my research, especially for us Filipinos far away from home, living in Australia, living in other parts of the world, there are a lot of evidence that shows that our community language, or the language of our parents, could potentially die within just 3 generations. And, pre-COVID time, we never thought that borders would close, right? Everybody would be coming, migrants would be coming. But now we know that there's a potential for border closing. And can you imagine if there will be no more migrants coming in, and the language from people who are here will be dying? So it's not concerning if you're back in the Philippines, but if you are living in a different country away from the mother country, then there is already a potential that the language would die. And I was telling this to all my friends and colleagues, and I said, could you imagine that if it's just me who's speaking Filipino in Australia and it dies with me? It seems that as a linguist, I couldn't let that happen. And I felt that I need to do something about it. So that's why I started this project.
That was May Safra, the founder of Tagalog Learning Incorporated. It's not-for-profit organization that aims to celebrate, maintain, and enrich the Filipino language, culture, tradition through its classes. It is committed to continue teaching free Filipino classes for children and teens for years and years to come.
And so I realized, I asked again, so why aren't there parents who are teaching their kids Filipino? And of course, parents are busy. They don't have time to do that. And then I said, okay, what about tutorials? And then again, Filipino parents are matipid. So that will be added to the gastos, that will be added to the expenses. And so I conducted another research and I said, what if I'm going to give free classes to your children? Are you going to enroll your children? And everybody would say, yes, yes, yes. So I said, okay, let's pilot the project. So I said, I'm going to campaign this free Filipino classes on Filipino stores, on social media, and all this. And if I am just going to get 10 kids, just 10 kids who will study with me on this pilot program, I'm going to give it a go. And on the first pilot program, I had 16 kids. So I was very excited. But we don't have money. We don't have funding. You know what I mean? So I had to write a letter to our local libraries. I was telling them, look, this is my project. We don't have a funding. Are you going to allow us to use the library for 5 weeks, just so we can pilot this. And if it's successful, then we'll move forward. So we were given an opportunity by the Brimbank Council to actually use the library to do our Filipino classes. And so we ran the first project 7 weeks, every Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then so after the pilot, I asked the parents, how do you feel about this? Are you happy to continue? And they said, yeah, we're more than happy to continue. And I said, look, we need to look for a place because the library can't host us for the entire year. But looking for a hub, even if it's a community hub, would mean cost. Because you have to pay for, even if we're not for profit, we still have to pay a certain amount for our community hubs. So I was like, I asked the parents, are you more than happy to split the bill with me? Because, I'm doing this because I love to teach the kids and I don't need to be paid for that, but we need to pay the hub. So they were like, we're more than happy to give $5, $10 to continue this project. So that is how Tagalog Learning Incorporated started.
She ended up having 16 kids in that pilot program. They were concerned about the project sustainability at the time because there was no reliable sources of finance.
So first of all is to open up the opportunity for parents and for kids to have a community that speaks in Filipino and that would be able to teach the kids in Filipino. Okay, so in the class, they learn how to greet, they learn vocabulary, they learn songs. Okay, so the nursery rhymes in Filipino, and then we read them stories because in reading stories, culture and tradition is embedded on that. So our stories are really the concept of the Philippines and not an English book translated in Filipino. It's nothing like that. So we are creating a community. So when, for example, you're a parent and you say, oh, have you tried the Filipino class of Teacher May? Then everybody, would be spreading the words. And then after that, once the kid would see that, oh, it's fun to learn Filipino, then they will develop the love for the language and the love for Filipino on their own.
Thanks to the joint effort of its devoted volunteers, enabling partners, cooperative parents, and highly motivated, engaging learners, Tagalog Learnings Incorporated was able to firmly set the truth in the community.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to forget your mother language, because that is part of your identity. You are a holistic person. Okay, so even, for example, there are a lot of Filipino family who are in interracial, intercultural marriages, and we celebrate that diversity. So why not celebrate as well, your heritage? For example, right? For example, I have children and my husband is, for example, Australian. So if we're celebrating Australian culture and Australian way of life, we can also celebrate the Filipino culture and the Filipino way of life. So I believe that it's not about choosing which side. There is no such thing as left and right, but it's actually, the interrelated what do you call this, identities that you have as a Filipino. Even if you're a Filipino who migrated abroad, or you're a Filipino who is now living in a different place. So I believe that form of, well, if you learn a language, it's not only giving you identity, because eventually when kids get older, they would ask questions. Why didn't I know a lot about the Philippines, And then once they visited the Philippines, they see their grandparents, their grand aunties, their cousins. They get so excited and so curious. Why didn't I learn about this when I was younger? And I think we should not deprive our children of that experience, even if they are in Australia or in New Zealand or anywhere in the world, to be honest. Yeah.
The knowledge that you are a native of your nation instills a sense of confidence and security. Various studies also reveal that bilingual persons' brains operate differently.
Quite interesting, actually, because there's a lot of misconceptions about language. They think that some languages, for example English, because it's a language of commerce or because it's called an international language, it is actually dominant. But that is actually just the perception that a society put into a language. No matter the language is, even if it's Aboriginal language, or even if only 10 people are actually speaking a language, all language are created equal. Okay, all language, they're all as features, they all have their own purpose. So if we're going to look into that, then learning Filipino and learning English is equally important, because they're both language and they have their own uniqueness and beauty and richness. But from a point of view, again, I'm going to explain this from a point of view of a researcher. There's a lot of evidence that shows that a child who has more than one language has better cognitive skills. Because to be able to translanguage and move from one language to another, your brain goes through a very complex process. And that is an advantage. And you probably already heard this, that those people who have more than one language reduce their risk of dementia because of that, cognitive ability.
Knowing a language allows one to immediately identify with those who speak the same language. This relationship is a critical component of culture exchange.
Aside from that, Filipino people are very family oriented. You know, those people who could speak the language of their parents and their grandparents have stronger familial relationship, bond, because it strengthened the intergenerational relationships. Imagine if your lolo can tell you their stories when they were young about their lives in the Philippines. You have a better understanding of them. So perhaps if we do that, there will be less generation gap, you know. And another thing is, there are a lot, of course, but another thing is there's also some economical benefits of learning a language. You know, you probably think that, oh, I don't need to learn Filipino. I'm in an English speaking country. But Nico, for myself, there's a lot of opportunities because Australian government, and I'm pretty sure other Commonwealth governments, they translate our important information into our community languages, especially during this COVID time. I can't tell you how many papers I have translated, or how many patalastas or advertisements I have recorded in Filipino. So there's also a lot of financial benefits, especially because there isn't a lot of good Filipino speakers in the country. So those are just, you know, a few of the benefits. So let us not discourage our children to learn the language. Yeah.
Our native language not only helps us to interact and connect with one another, it also enables us to comprehend and respect our ancestors and upbringing history.
So there's a lot more to being Filipino than learning the language. Okay, so language is just one aspect of that. And yes, of course, you will have more opportunities to understand the Philippines better, the life in the Philippines better, if you can speak the language, because it opens your doors to really good, for example, literature. For example, imagine if you can read Noli Me Tangere or El Filibusterismo in Filipino, and that would really fire up your patriotism. But there's more to being Filipino than just speaking the language, right? There's a lot more that we can do that doesn't necessarily have to be language. For example, the concept of pagmamano. We can teach our children that. Po and opo, even if they're speaking in English, they can say yes po, no po, diba? Not yet po. Those kinds of little things, and the way we respect our elders, you know, the way we treat our grandparents. So again, there's a lot more to being Filipino than just language. But of course, as I said, language would pave a way to a better understanding of concepts and different cultural aspects of the Philippines.
I've spent a lot of time asking that question to a lot of interviewees, and everyone has their own answer. My Filipino, my Tagalog particularly, is not great. In fact, that's the reason why I signed up to join Radyo Filipino. I wanted to go through the grind of having to force myself to translate it. I don't do it very well, but it's good enough.
That was Juan Paulo Legaspi, officer of Radio Filipino Adelaide. He wanted to learn Filipino a little bit more, so he started volunteering for Filipino group. By helping them with research and translating the news, he eventually became a broadcaster. Juan Paulo believed that a slow introduction to the culture is the best way to get people interested in learning the Filipino language.
take that aside. If you don't have the language, what are your connections? I would argue you're still Filipino if you still have the spirit of the Filipino. And there's this great quote that I had from Carlos Romulo, and this is an excerpt from I Am Filipino, and it says, this is the part that I like the most. I am a Filipino, inheritor of a glorious past, hostage to an uncertain future. And I think that captures a little bit of that spirit. But then he goes on to talk about the history of all these past Filipinos and the fighting spirit of the Filipino. And I think that speaks to a lot of it. You know, do you have the spirit of a Filipino? And there's a lot of culture behind it, you know. So it's food, music, warm openness kind of approach, the spirit of kababayan. I think it's more to it than just language. It's the whole kind of approach to being a Filipino. And I think that's part of what, but not only Radyo Filipino, but a lot of content creators can contribute to the conversation to inspire people that have lost that connection. And if it can be intimidating, if you don't understand the language, you go, how can I connect? Well, if you're eating adobo every day, well, that's a start, you know, like start getting into the food. Have you been listening to the music? You know, is there a little bit of TV that you can kind of, and then you get an introduction, a slow introduction to the culture. And then for those that are really interested, they learn the language. I think the approach before has been, you must learn the language, otherwise you're not a Filipino. And it turns off a lot of people. And there's way too many second, third generation Filipinos out there that don't have the language. So we either kind of try and include them, or we just go, they're not Filipino, which I think would be a shame if we did.
Although language is not the only way to feel connected to your culture, it is still a very effective tool.
Dahil ako'y isang guro, gusto kong madama ang damdamin ng mga bagong dating na Filipino at ang ibang Filipino kung gaano kaganda ang damdamin ng isang Australiano sa kanyang bansa at sa kanyang kapwa-tao.
No one should feel compelled to choose only one aspect of their identity. Whether you are half Filipino or a full Filipino who just migrated to a foreign country, language is one of the most powerful tools you can use to retain both identities.
I think the most important thing to do is to actually talk to our parents. This what you're doing right now is very, very good because it helps us disseminate this information. It helps us explain to them the importance of learning their community language. And I'm not only talking about Tagalog. Teach your children Kapampangan, Hiligaynon, Cebuano, all your mother tongue, teach them. It's very important. You know, it's not just the Filipino as the national language. All our languages in the Philippines, we have to teach those to our children because eventually they would be able to keep our culture, to keep our tradition. And siguro for parents, I would really encourage them to really let the kids experience it, because sometimes, parents, we make decisions for our children, right? Let them experience it, and then if they're more than happy to continue, support them, but don't deprive them from experiencing the language, or from, because I've observed in my class, they have their own friends, sometimes they chat to each other in Filipino, they would listen to Filipino songs, and then they would hum the Filipino songs, sometimes we would create some activities, someone's playing the guitar, they try to learn, Filipino music. It doesn't necessarily have to be a classroom setup, you know what I mean? They don't have to go to a Sunday school or a classroom setup, but let them experience the music, the movies, the experience of being Filipino. That's what we can do. And especially now, like for example, with the use of technology, we can do a lot of things. So I would encourage parents to do that as well.
If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. That's what's a quote by Nelson Mandela, the President of South Africa. A powerful quote by admirable man. Language is an essential component of any culture. It is means through which individuals interact with one another, form connection, and foster a feeling of community. These are around 6,500 spoken languages in the world today. Each of which is unique in a variety of ways. If you are Filipino and even you are live far away from your homeland, if you have the responsibility to keep your Filipino identity alive, and the best way to do that is by learning your native tongue. This podcast is hosted and directed by me, Miko Santos, created by Kangaroo Firm Media Labs, Australia's independent podcast management company. Thank you to our team, researched by Yvonne Santos, edited and mixed by Jaime Bara, sound design by Ivan Santos, executive producer Rich May Valencia, podcast producer Jamie Lopez, assistant podcast producer Rene Benales, copywriter Tim Feliciano, podcast booking specialist Rochelle Cando, social media managers Corina Basubas and Sheila Gadoy, podcast project manager May Ann Alimiena, Guerrilla Podcast head of podcasting Mira Teclao, website designer Francesca Rivano, voiceover artist Kiko Malikdem, music by audiohero.com and Epidemic Sound. Filipinotastic logo by Sid Tabar. Thank you to our guests, May Zafra, Juliet Oy, Juan Paulo Ligaspi, and Irene Evangelista. Once again, thank you so much for carving out the time to hear what was shared on today's podcast. Don't forget, there's a free podcast course waiting for you over at podcasta.org. Also, if you found it helpful, then please share it with someone else. Just simply share with them the link or post it on their Facebook wall and say, check this out. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so every podcast gets sent straight to you and you don't have to go searching for it. This is Filipinotastic. I'm Nico Santos. See you again in 2 weeks' time.